The Stanley Cup has a long and fascinating history, and today in this part 1 video, I'm going to go over around half of the NHL team's Stanley Cup history, with part 2 coming next week going over the remainder of the teams. Before I get to the teams that have played in the final, I want to talk about the 5 that have yet to make it there. The Blue Jackets came into the league at the turn of the millennium and spent their first decade struggling just to be relevant. Their most iconic moment so far came in 2019 when they shocked the world by sweeping the record-setting 62-win Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round. It was one of the greatest upsets in NHL history, but they bowed out in the very next series. Colombus has produced stars like Rick Nash and Sergei Bobrovsky, but they've never managed to break through to a cup final or even make it to the conference finals. Minnesota Wild, the new Minnesota franchise after the North Stars left for Dallas, have consistently been a solid team, but they've never gotten past the third round. They made a Cinderella run to the Western Conference Finals in 2003, led by Marian Gaborik and goalie Manny Fernandez, but since then it's mostly been years of playoff cameos without a final. Minnesota fans are still waiting for that first cup appearance since their original North Stars run in 1991. Winnipeg Jets. The current Jets are technically the relocated Atlanta Thrashers who never won a playoff series before moving. Since coming to Winnipeg, they've had strong rosters, especially in 2018 when they reached the conference final led by Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, and Connor Hellebuck, where Vegas took them down, as well as 2025 where they won the President's Trophy only to get bounced in the second round. The Jets have not had a deeper playoff run than they did in 2018 in their short history. Utah Mammoth. The Mammoth Hockey Club Coyotes' history is long, complicated, and full of off-ice drama, ownership issues, relocations, arenas, and now Mormons. On the ice, their best moment came in 2012 when Shane Doan and Mike Smith led them to the Western Conference Final. They lost to the eventual champion Kings, and they've never been back to that stage. Despite existing in some form for over 40 years, this franchise has never reached the final. Seattle Kraken. The NHL's newest expansion team, starting in 2021, the Kraken have only been to the playoffs once, which was in their second year. They weren't expected to do much and took down the defending champs in 7 games in the first round. They weren't done just yet because they took the Dallas Stars to 7 games in the second round before going down. While things seem to be headed in the right direction, the Kraken have yet to return to the playoffs since. So there you have it. 5 franchises that have yet to even get a chance to play for the Stanley Cup. Now let's move on to the teams who have made it, starting with those who only got there but never won. San Jose Sharks. The Sharks were one of the most consistent regular season franchises of the 2000s, with Jumbo Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau as the face of the franchise, and later Joe Pavelski's Dutch playoff scoring. San Jose always looked like a cup contender, but for years, their reputation was built on heartbreak. 2009's President's Trophy team ousted in the first round, the 2014 collapse against the Kings after being up 3-0 in the series. Fans just called it Sharks hockey. Then came 2016. The team finally put all those ghosts behind them and bulldozed through the Western. Thornton, at 36 years old, got the deep playoff run people had been begging for, and Pavelski became captain clutch with a playoff-leading 14 goals. In San Jose, the Shark tank was deafening, teal towels waving like never before, but in the final, they drew the Pittsburgh Penguins, fast, relentless, and loaded with Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and of course Phil Kessel. The Sharks battled, even winning their first ever Cup final game in overtime at home, but Pittsburgh's speed wore them down and the Penguins took it in 6. For a franchise that had waited 25 years, it was exhilarating to finally get there, but brutal that it ended the way it did. Nashville Predators. When Nashville joined the league in 1998, people wondered if hockey could work in Tennessee. By the 2010s, Smashville had become one of the rowdiest hockey markets in North America. The 2017 playoffs were their coming out party. That spring, the Preds squeaked into the playoffs as the very last seed. No one gave them a chance against the Chicago Blackhawks dynasty, and then Nashville swept them. Smashville went insane. Country stars like Carrie Underwood were fixtures in the crowd, and the chants inside Bridgestone Arena became some of the loudest in the league. Led by PK Subban's energy, Roman Yossi's poise, and Pekka Rinne's brilliance in goal, Nashville stormed all the way to the Cup final. They made it a fight, but once again, the Penguins stood in their way. Nashville dropped the series in 6, and their best moment came in Game 4 when a rookie goalie, Jussi Saros, stepped in and helped tie the series. Still, Pittsburgh's depth was just too much. Even in defeat, the run cemented Nashville's place as a true hockey town. Ottawa Senators. The modern Senators, founded in '92, spent the 2000s as one of the league's most dangerous offensive teams. With Daniel Alfredson, Jason Spezza, and Danny Heatley, they were the pizza line, because the local promotions gave fans free pizza if the team scored 6 goals, which they often did. Ottawa was loaded, but postseason heartbreak always followed. In 2007, it all finally clicked. Ray Emery was sharp in net, Alfie was great, and the Senators plowed through the Eastern Conference to reach their first final. Felt like destiny, but unfortunately destiny wore Anaheim Ducks colors. The 2007 Ducks were massive, bruising, and backstopped by Scott Niedermayer and Chris Pronger on defense. Ottawa stole Game 3 at home, but Anaheim controlled the rest. Winning the series in 5, Alfredsson scored the franchise's lone Stanley Cup Final goal on home ice. That was as close as they'd get. The Sens had another brush with glory in 2017 when Erik Karlsson carried them within a goal of the final. They lost in double overtime of Game 7 to, again, Pittsburgh, but the only actual to the Cup stage came in 2007, and to this day, that remains the pinnacle of modern Ottawa hockey. Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres have been chasing glory since they came into the league in 1970. Their first trip to the Stanley Cup Final came in 1975, and it was wild, literally. That series against the Philadelphia Flyers is remembered for the fog game. Without proper air conditioning in Buffalo's Memorial Auditorium, humidity rose so high during Game 3 that actual fog filled the arena. Players disappeared in the mist, officials actually had to pause play to let it clear, and at one point a bat was swooping around the ice until Jim Lawrence swatted it out of there, but never won. It was bizarre,
San Jose
Sharks, pure hockey chaos. Unfortunately for Buffalo, the Broad Street Bullies were in their prime, and the Flyers took the series in 6. The Sabres and Patrick Marleau as the face of the franchise, and later Joe Pavelski is the greatest goaltenders of all time, and Dominik Hasek. Nicknamed the Dominator, he dragged Buffalo through round after round with superhuman performances. In the final, they faced the Dallas Stars, and after splitting the first 4 games, Dallas pulled ahead. Then came Game 6. Triple overtime when Brett Hull scored the cup winner with his foot in the crease. By the rulebook of the time, it should have been disallowed, but officials counted it anyway. To this day, Sabres fans call it the no goal, one of the most infamous endings in hockey history. And since then, it's just been pain. The Sabres haven't been back, and in recent years, they set the record for the NHL's longest playoff drought, which looks to still be growing as the Sabres are not expected to do much in 2025-26. Vancouver Canucks. Few franchises wear the so close yet so far label like the Vancouver Canucks. They've been to the Stanley Cup 3 times, and each time the city has lived and died with them, literally in one case. Their first chance came in 1982. The Canucks were massive underdogs, barely above 500 in the regular season, but goalie King Richard Brodeur went on a heater, and Vancouver upset Calgary and Chicago to reach the final. The magic ended there, though, as the dynastic New York Islanders swept them en route to their third of 4 straight cups. In 1994, Vancouver was back, this time led by Pavel Bure, Trevor Linden, and goalie Kirk McLean. That run captured the city's heart, especially Bure's electric overtime winner against Calgary in the first round. The Canucks pushed the New York Rangers to a decisive Game 7 in Madison Square Garden, only to fall short by a single goal. The Rangers ended a 54-year drought, and Vancouver was left devastated. Their most infamous run came in 2011. The Canucks won the President's Trophy and stormed through the playoffs. Led by the Saden twins, Ryan Kessler and Roberto Luongo, they had home ice for Game 7 of the final against the Boston Bruins. Vancouver scored first, but Boston took control, and Tim Thomas shut the door. The Bruins hoisted the cup on Vancouver ice, and the city erupted into riots downtown. Cars torched, windows smashed, a scar on an otherwise unforgettable season. Vancouver was still searching for that first cup, and with each passing decade, the heartbreak grows sharper. Vegas Golden Knights. Few expansion teams in sports history have hit the ground running like the Vegas Golden Knights. Born in 2017, many expected them to be bottom feeders while they figured out how to build a roster. Instead, they shocked the hockey world. In their inaugural season, Vegas rode a mix of discarded players from the expansion draft and veteran leadership to one of the most unlikely finals runs ever. Marc-Andre Fleury, brought in from Pittsburgh, was brilliant in net. William Karlsson exploded for a 40-goal season after being left unprotected by Columbus. Jonathan Marchessault, Riley Smith, and the rest of these players quickly contributed. Against all odds, Vegas stormed through the Western Conference and made it all the way to the Stanley Cup Final in year 1. The Magic ended against the Washington Capitals in 5 games, but the league had been put on notice. 6 years later, the Knights got another chance, and this time they finished the job. In 2023, led by captain Mark Stone, Jack Eichel, and playoff MVP Jonathan Marchessault, Vegas dominated the Florida Panthers in the final, winning the series in 5 games. Their Game 5 victory was a blowout, capped off by Stone's hat-trick as T-Mobile Arena erupted. It was the fastest cup win ever for an expansion team, and it firmly established Vegas as a premier franchise. Washington Capitals. The Capitals' history is split in 2, before 2018 and after. Their first trip to the Cup Final came in 1998. That team was gritty, defensive, and powered by Olaf Kolzig in net, but when they ran Detroit Red Wings dynasty, it wasn't close. Detroit swept them in 4, outscoring them 16-7, and the Caps limped home empty-handed. What followed was 2 decades of frustration. Defined by one man, Alex Ovechkin, drafted first overall in 2004, Ovechkin became one of, if not the greatest goal scorers the sport has ever seen, and just broke Gretzky's record last season. He won MVPs, Brockert Richard, and transformed the franchise into a perennial contender. But every spring the story was the same. Playoff collapses, usually against Sidney Crosby and the Penguins. Ovechkin was unfairly branded a choker. Then came 2018. The Caps broke through Pittsburgh, beat Tampa in a grueling 7-game series, and reached the final again. This time against the Vegas Golden Knights, who I just went over, and like I said, in 5 games, Washington finished the job. Ovechkin lifted the cup and delivered one of the most famous celebrations in NHL history. Anaheim Ducks. No franchise has a stranger origin than the Ducks. Born out of Disney's Mighty Ducks movie franchise, Anaheim started as a marketing gimmick in 1993. By 2003 though, they built a legitimate team. That year, Paul Kariya, Adam Oates, and Mike Babcock behind the bench helped drag Anaheim to their first final. Goalie Jean-Sébastien Giguère was nothing short of spectacular. In fact, so spectacular that he won the Conn Smythe as playoff MVP despite the Ducks losing. In Game 6 against New Jersey, Kariya scored a famous goal just minutes after being knocked out by a brutal hit. But New Jersey closed the series in Game 7 and Anaheim was denied. They wouldn't have to wait long. By 2007, Anaheim had rebranded, dropping Mighty, and built a bruising powerhouse. Scott Niedermayer and Chris Pronger patrolled the blue line. Teemu Selanne finally got his chance at glory, and Ryan Getzlaf and Corey Perry were the next generation coming into their own. In the final, Anaheim overpowered Ottawa in 5 games, delivering California's first Stanley Cup championship. Since then, Anaheim has been up and down, but that 2007 run remains iconic. Proof that a team born from Hollywood could make real hockey history. It's also weird seeing Corey Perry actually on the winning side in the Stanley Cup Finals. Carolina Hurricanes. The Hurricane story is one of reinvention. Born as the Hartford Whalers, the franchise relocated to Raleigh in 1997 and took a few years to find its footing. By 2002, they were surprising people. Led by captain Ron Francis and goalie Artur Zerbe, they reached the Stanley Cup Final, only to fall to the Detroit Red Wings in 5 games. Then came 2006. A season that rewrote everything. Rookie Eric Stahl emerged as a superstar, Rod Brind'Amour was the heart and soul captain, and Cam Ward, no, not that Cam Ward, a 22-year-old rookie goalie, came out of nowhere to backstop them to glory. The final against the Edmonton Oilers went the distance, all 7 games, and Game 7, on home ice, Justin Williams sealed it with an empty netter, and the RBC Center erupted. Ward won the Conn Smythe, Brind'Amour lifted the cup, and Carolina became the first major pro sports team to bring a championship to the state. Since then, the Canes have developed into a model of consistency under Rod Brind'Amour, this time behind the bench. They've had strong teams in the 2020s, but have failed to make it back to the cup. They just ended a 15-game losing streak in the conference finals, but still lost in 5 to the eventual champion Panthers just a few months ago. Dallas Stars. The Stars' tale spans 2 cities. As the Minnesota North Stars, they reached the final twice, losing in 1981 and 91. But after moving to Dallas in 93, they quickly carved out their own identity in Texas. In 1991, they finally captured glory. Led by Mike Modano, Joe Nieuwendyk, and Ed Belfour in net, Dallas faced the Buffalo Sabres in a hard-fought final. Game 6 went into triple overtime, and Brett Hull scored the cup clincher with his skate clearly in the crease. And like I said, that was a violation of the rules at the time, but officials counted it anyway. And while this may haunt Sabres fans, Dallas fans still celebrate this as the only time they've lifted the cup so far. They nearly repeated in 2000, but lost to the Devils in 6. In the decades since, they've had ups and downs, from the Stars won the Cup Echoes in 99 to a lot of deep playoff runs, including a recent finals loss to Tampa and 3 straight conference finals losses. They're still contenders, so we'll have to see if they can finally get over that hump. Calgary Flames. Calgary's first taste of the final came in 1986 when they were stopped by a rookie goalie named Patrick Roy and the Montreal Canadiens. But in 1989, everything clicked. Lanny McDonald, Al McInnes, Theo Fleury, and Joe Nieuwendyk powered the Flames to their first and still only cup. They became the only visiting team ever to win the Stanley Cup inside the Montreal Forum, a little poetic revenge for 86. Their third trip in 2004 remains one of the most debated in league history. Jerome McGinley led Calgary on his back. Kiprusoff shut the door in net, and the Flames took Tampa Bay to 7 games. In Game 6, Martin Galinas appeared to score the cup clincher. With replay showing the puck might have crossed the line, the call on the ice was no goal, and Tampa went on to win in Game 7. Flames fans still talk about the Galinas goal the way Sabres fans talk about the no goal. Since then, Calgary has had flashes, but never returned to the big stage. St. Louis Blues. Blues entered the NHL in 1967 and immediately made 3 straight cup finals, but it wasn't as magical as it sounds. The league structured the playoffs so one expansion team had to make it, and St. Louis was promptly swept 3 years in a row. Bobby Orr's famous flying goal in 1970, that was scored against the Blues. For decades, St. Louis was the NHL's almost team. Brett Hull's 86-goal season in 1990, Al MacInnis' slap shot, Chris Pronger's dominance, and yet no final appearances after 1970. Their playoff heartbreak, like the Steve Yzerman OT bomb in 1996, defined them more than their successes. Then finally, in 2019, at one point dead last in the NHL in January, the Blues went on a miracle run behind rookie goalie Jordan Binnington and coach Craig Berube. In the final, they faced Boston, the same team that haunted them decades earlier. This time in Game 7 on the road, St. Louis dominated, Ryan O'Reilly won the Conn Smythe, Binnington stood tall, and the Blues lifted the cup for the first time in franchise history. After 52 years of waiting, the Blues' curse was finally over. Los Angeles Kings. For most of their existence, the Kings were more famous for the celebrities in their stands than playing on the ice. That changed in 1988 when Wayne Gretzky was traded to LA, turning the Kings into a legitimate hockey town. In 93, Gretzky carried them all the way to their first Stanley Cup Final. He scored a hat-trick in Game 7 of the conference finals to knock out Toronto, but in the Cup Final, LA fell short to Patrick Roy and the Montreal Canadiens in 5 games. Marty McSorley's infamous illegal stick penalty in Game 2 shifted the momentum, and the Kings never recovered. Nearly 2 decades later, a new generation of Kings finally rewrote history. In 2012, Los Angeles squeaked into the playoffs as the 8th seed, but Jonathan Quick went on one of the greatest goaltending runs ever. Dustin Brown, Drew Doughty, and Anze Kopitar powered them to upset after upset. They lost just 2 games en route to the final, then crushed New Jersey in 6 to claim their first championship in franchise history. Quick won the Conn Smythe, and the Kings went from underachievers to Cup champions almost overnight. 2 years later, they did it again. Their 2014 run was the stuff of a legend. 3 straight 7-game series against San Jose, Anaheim, and Chicago, capped by Alec Martinez's OT winner in Game 7 against the Blackhawks. In the final, Martinez struck again, scoring in double OT of Game 5 to clinch the cup against the Rangers. 2 championships in 3 years cemented the Kings as a modern dynasty, built on grit, clutch goals, and Rangers legend Jonathan Quick's brilliance. Florida Panthers. For most of their history, the Florida Panthers didn't do much. Founded in '93, they became famous for fans throwing plastic rats on the ice after Scott Millenby killed a rat in the locker room before a game. Became a bizarre superstition that symbolized their Cinderella run to the '96 Stanley Cup Final. Led by John Vanby's broken net, they shocked the world by reaching the final in just their 3rd season. Unfortunately, they ran into a juggernaut, the Colorado Avalanche, who swept them in 4, before Uwe Krupp ended it, leaving Florida heartbroken. For decades afterward, the Panthers couldn't get back. They made the playoffs here and there, but the success was fleeting. They won the President's Trophy in 22, but got swept in the second round to their state rival, Tampa Bay Lightning. Then came 2023, one of the most magical underdog runs in modern NHL history. The Panthers barely squeaked into the playoffs as the last seed, then upset the 65-win Boston Bruins in round 1, one of the greatest upsets in league history. Matthew Tkachuk became the face of the run, scoring clutch goals and dragging the team to the final. Florida eventually fell short against Vegas, but the spark had been lit. The very next year, they proved it wasn't a fluke. In 2024, the Panthers returned to the final and this time finished the job. Sergei Bobrovsky was brilliant in net, Sasha Barkov set the tone as captain, and Carter Verhaeghe scored clutch goals again and again. They defeated the Edmonton Oilers in 7 games after initially being up 3-0. Then they returned again in 2025 and faced the Oilers again, and this time finished the job in 6 games. The Panthers are going into the 2025-26 season trying to do what few teams have done and three-peat. Philadelphia Flyers. When the Flyers joined the NHL in 1967, no one expected them to dominate so quickly, but by the mid-1970s, they had forged a new identity, the Broad Street Bullies. With Bobby Clarke leading the way, Bernie Parent in net, and Dave Schultz on the ice, the Flyers bullied and battered their opponents. It worked. In 1974, they stunned the heavily favored Boston Bruins to win their first Stanley Cup. They repeated the feat in 1975, defeating the Buffalo Sabres. Parent won the Conn Smythe both times, and the Flyers became the first expansion team to hoist the cup. But that would be it for their cup wins. In 1976, they ran into the Montreal Canadiens dynasty and were swept. In 1980, they lost to the Rising Islanders. Later on in the 80s, they fell twice to Wayne Gretzky's Oilers in 85 and 87, despite heroic goaltending from Ron Hextall. Their next chance came in 97 when Eric Lindros and the Legion of Doom line powered them to the final. only to be swept by Detroit. Then in 2010, after a magical run where they rallied from a 3-0 deficit against Boston, they lost to Chicago in 6 with Patrick Kane's OT winner. 8 trips, 2 cups, 50 years since the last championship. Alright, that's around half the teams, so if you want to check out part 2, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll see when that comes out. Thank you for watching Hockey Domain, and I'll see you next time.